What's going on, everybody? So this is my third book review, and the book I chose to review is The Impact of Science on Society by Lord Bertrand Russell. Yes, he was an aristocratic lord, and this was published in 1952. This is going to be a summary / critique of the book, and before I get started, I'd love to invite you all to like the channel, the book Peddler, like and subscribe, and hit the little notification bell for more videos on book picks and in-shop activity, and of course for more book reviews. So let's get started here. The Impact of Science on Society by Bertrand Russell. Now, when I approach a book like this, I find it to be of the utmost importance as to knowing the background of the author. Where does his motivations lie? How is his belief system structured? Who's the company he keeps, the groups he's involved with? In short, what kind of fruit does his tree bear? Now, I'll take a few minutes to give you a short synopsis as to who Bertrand Russell was and the foundations he stood on. One of his personal motivations was to see the world enter into a one-world international order. His belief structure was that of a collectivist. He was a nihilist and an atheist and a self-proclaimed pacifist, which is laughable after reading this book. He came from an aristocratic family, and the company he kept as well as the groups he belonged to were comprised of men and women of similar backgrounds. The groups he involved himself with, be it the Milner Group or the Fabian Society, promulgated and promoted a world government, an expansion of an Anglo-American establishment that insider and historian Carroll Quigley titled his book and wrote about some of these influential groups and characters involved. The Fabian Society's original coat of arms was that of a wolf in sheep's clothing. This symbol accurately and fittingly depicts that of Russell and his ilk. Another one of their symbols, the Fabian window, is a stained glass window on display at the London School of Economics. It depicts members Sidney Webb and Edward R. Pease hammering the earth on an anvil beneath the Fabian Society emblem. At the top of the window are the words, "Remold it nearer to the heart's desire," representing that of the Fabians shaping and hammering by force the world into their image, essentially them playing the role of God. What was their godly image, their so-called great work building towards? Again, a one-world government, a one-world religion, a one-world economic system, a world held in bondage to a ruling class. Just to briefly explain how this society came up with their name being the Fabians, the society was named at the suggestion of Frank Podmore, who was a member, and it was in honor of the Roman general Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus, nicknamed Cunctator, meaning the delayer. His Fabian strategy sought gradual victory against the superior Carthaginian army under the renowned general Hannibal through persistence, harassment, and wearing the enemy down by attrition rather than pitched climatic battles. An explanatory note appearing on the title page of the group's first pamphlet declared, quote, "For the right moment you must wait, as Fabius did most patiently, when warring against Hannibal, though many censored his delays. But when the time comes you must strike hard, as Fabius did, or your waiting will be in vain and fruitless." This is the underlying ideology as to how this group thought to best implement a new world government system onto society, through persistence and patient indoctrination of the masses until acceptance was won. What fruit did Russell's tree bear? Rotten, pestilent-ridden fruit. That's not just inflammatory, wild conjecture. After reading this book, it was apparent to me that Russell had an utter disdain for humanity and believed it should be significantly reduced. Russell was a hardcore eugenicist and made no bones about it. Again, a man that was considered a great philosopher of his time, his work being promoted heavily throughout the years, the self-proclaimed pacifist and outwardly gentle-spoken was in fact vicious with a psychopathic mentality. He even called for a preemptive thermonuclear strike against the Soviets at one point. A bloodthirsty man indeed. For me, there's nothing noble nor admirable about Russell, but I do think this is a very important book because it directly exposes from his own words the mentality and agenda of not just Russell, but an elitist group of people, insiders so to say, who were actively working towards uprooting and reforming society without anyone's consent, and doing so in a deceptive, deceitful way. His work still has a massive impact today, and this sinister eugenics-based ideology, although not a new one, has become adopted and internalized by many in this country and has been recognized as something almost respectable within the universities. As I lay out his beliefs and quote directly from this book, I believe you shall see how his thoughts and ideology have permeated into and influenced our society today. It's important to keep in mind that this book was not expected to be read by the general public. The publisher's note within the book states that this book was based upon lectures given at Ruskin College in Oxford, chapters 1, 2, and 6 repeated at Columbia University under the auspices of the Machete Foundation. The last chapter in the book was the Lloyd Roberts lecture, given at the Royal Society of Medicine in London. It was distributed by and for elite universities, delivered to those who were at the forefront of becoming society's future leaders. Of course, these future leaders would most likely not understand that you don't become an elitist aristocrat like Russell because you implement and spout his doctrine, using your position and influence within society to promulgate his work, and thinking that somehow you would be spared by a sycophantic ideology, or not be affected by the psychological warfare methods he proposed to destroy the social fabric of all societies throughout the world. No, you would not be spared, but you would merely be a pawn on the grand chessboard. Russell's stature in society was based on his birth, his bloodline, nothing more. If you are not of his blood or those particular bloodlines that his family interbred with, similar to those who move within his upper circles, comprised of aristocratic elites at the time, then you can never truly be one of them. It is purely eugenics-based with these people. The most these future leaders could hope for would be if they were selected onto the boards of think tank groups and roundtables that dictate and influence policies in efforts to bend societies toward world government, or perhaps the front faces of subsidiary groups in key public figure positions to exert their influence. So with that being said, let's get on with the book itself. So the beginning of the book starts with a simple timeline as to how science has benefited the general population throughout the years, but also how it has specifically benefited an elite governing class, how science is naturally leading towards a more centralized form of government. Russell believes the mechanisms of science must be maintained, controlled, and directed in order to ensure a proper transition into a world collectivist government. He points out that empires such as the Roman, British, and Napoleonic failed because they could only grow so far and wide, but without having a better communication system set in place, could only be able to grow so much. With the advances in technology, however, this would not be an issue anymore. Communication is instantaneous. Quote, there would now be no technical difficulty about a single world government. He also gives an example of how when he was visiting the States, he stayed on a farm which was wholly dependent upon technology, and how after a storm when power was lost, the farm was pretty much helpless with its operations. From this experience, I believe what Russell was alluding to was the recognition that as a population was becoming more dependent on technology and less able to self-sustain independently from it, so it goes that those that control it would have more power over a population, which would become subservient. However, he recognized that in the past what brought unity and cohesion was predominantly based on a common enemy, actual or potential. Because of this, Russell says, quote, it seems to follow that a world government could only be kept in being by force, not by the spontaneous loyalty that now inspires a nation at war. So he recognizes that science is helping in centralizing the population, and elite control of this in the hands of the few can maintain their control easier than in the past. Russell also recognized that the most important thing, however, would be the study of mass psychology. Quote, its importance has been enormously increased by the growth of modern methods of propaganda. Of these, the most influential is what is called education. The press, the cinema, and the radio play an increasing part. We now know that limelight and brass bands do more to persuade than can be done by the most eloquent train of syllogisms. It may be hoped that in time anybody will be able to persuade anybody of anything. Russell understood that in order to accomplish an integrated system on a global scale, that people's thought processes needed to be controlled and directed. Feed the public ideas and beliefs that will influence them and hopefully adopt them as their own, and everyone will be arriving at the same conclusions. Russell believed that social engineers of the future, under a scientific dictatorship, will find the proper formula to influence the minds of the masses. Truth will be whatever the state deems it to be. The social psychologists of the future will have a number of classes of school children on whom they will try different methods of producing an unshakable conviction that snow is black. If anyone has ever read George Orwell's 1984, the original title being The Last Man, as Winston, the main character, is being tortured, he is asked, "How many fingers am I holding up?" by his tormentor. Well, if the state, so to say, is holding up 4 fingers but claim it to be 3, you are to answer 3. 2 plus 2 is 5 if the state deems it such. Winston was tortured into compliance until his mind saw 4 fingers in front of him as being 3. Now, is torture necessary in this day of age to get these kinds of results? It is not. With the implementation of groupthink behavior, laugh at those and ostracize those that divert from the status quo, slander them, discourage individualistic behavior and thought, there are plenty of different manipulative psychological ways to get individuals to stay in line and regurgitate the status. The opinion that snow is white must be held to show a morbid taste for eccentricity. Well, once again, anybody that deviates and detracts from the state-fed narrative is to be viewed as an eccentric. Quirky, strange, abnormal, weird, maybe kind of amusing. Not necessarily a threat, but someone whose thought process, despite if it be grounded in study, information, reflection, would not be taken seriously or given a second thought. Again, the snow is black, not white. How many fingers am I holding up, Winston? It is for future scientists to make these maxims precise and discover exactly how much it costs per head to make children believe that snow is black, and how much less it would cost to make them believe it is dark gray. Although this science will be diligently studied, it will be rigidly confined to the governing class. The populace will not be allowed to know how its convictions were generated. The training ground of this was to be the education system. Russell recognized the family unit was the greatest threat to world government. General wisdom, knowledge, and belief is passed down through generations. This would be a problem. Influence of home is obstructive. The child must be indoctrinated before the age of 10 so as to have a lasting effect. So has the traditional family unit been damaged? Well, at this point, there's over a 50% divorce rate. Promiscuity is promoted everywhere. Standardized, federally funded school systems push collectivization, socialist ideology, and encourage groupthink behavior and discourage individuality. Traditional value systems are being obliterated, or have been obliterated, which once helped ensure and hold the moral fabric of society together. Every time I see a commercial that has to do with a family, the father's made to look like a moron, or many families are multiracial, which statistically is probably less than 5% in this country. Also, there is the promotion of gay, queer, transgenders. You would think half the country is gay by the heavy promotion, when I believe, again, it's about 3% of the population, maybe. It's not that I personally care what people are and what they do, but how come those producing these commercials, or not just with commercials, but in media across the board, are making the exception as if it's the norm? The traditional family unit has been under attack for a long time. Instead of parents teaching their children, we now have so-called experts to do so. Experts telling us how to do even the most basic things. A new mother, instead of listening to their mother on how to rear their children, will listen to the experts in the field. Information passed down from mother to daughters for generations would learn to be disregarded. The experts convinced millions of mothers to feed their newborn baby formula, convincing them that it was more nutritious than that of the mother's own natural breast milk. So-called experts tell us a lot of things, and many unquestionably accept what they are told because, well, the attitude that they are smarter than me and you have to trust the science, right? Many people go against their own instincts and don't even question where their thoughts come from to begin with. These are very basic examples. I'm sure you can think of a million other ones. New study says, and so on and so forth, constantly pumped to the public every day. New policies and programs funded on a federal level, are brought to you in many cases by large international committees that men like Russell were a part of. These committees have huge influence on modern-day society, and the people that comprise them closely follow his ideology. They literally see themselves as our betters and write about the general public as if we were a separate species. Russell also believed that verses set to music and repeatedly in tone are very effective. I don't believe I need to go too deeply into this for anyone to realize how powerful and revolutionary music can be. Nor do I want to prattle on for what could be hours as to the control and influence of the music industry on the masses. I will leave you with this, however. The control of music is nothing new. If you read Plato's Republic, which to me is a blueprint for an oligarchical class to rule over the masses, one of the mechanisms to do this was to regulate and control music, licensing it even. Keep in mind, Plato's Republic was written over 2,000 years ago. And even then, Plato and the ruling elite at the time knew how important it was to control the societal influencer. Today, like with everything else, the sophistication of science and the ability to manipulate makes everything easier to control and influence by those who have the ability to. So let's continue on. Russell speculates as to the future developments of what a scientific oligarchy would look like. In short, as said before, it would be one based on eugenics and life controlled by the states. It is expected that advances in physiology and psychology will give governments much more control over individual mentality than they not have even in totalitarian countries. Fichte, who was a German philosopher, his full name was Johann Gottlieb Fichte, laid it down that education should aim at destroying free will, so that after pupils have left school, they shall be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. Diet injections or injunctions will combine from a very early age to produce a sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable, and any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible. Even if all are miserable, all will believe themselves happy because the government will tell them that they are so. I'm going to read that again and try to let it sink in a bit. Diet injections and injunctions. So what does he mean by injections? And injunctions will combine from a very early age to produce a sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable. And any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible. Another quote, children will, as in Plato's Republic, be taken from their mothers and reared by professional nurses. My interjection here, or the education system, and teachers who regurgitate material fed by the state, trained to obey. Let me continue with the quote. Gradually, by selective breeding, the congenital differences between rulers and ruled will increase until they become almost different species. A revolt of the plebes would become unthinkable as an organized insurrection of sheep against the practice of eating mutton. Those accustomed to this system, the family as we know it would seem as queer as the tribal and totem organization of Australian Aborigines seem to us. So, other words, the family one day will be seen as a relic and looked upon as such, the family unit. Quote, the rights of man as an absolute theory, the doctrine cannot be accepted. So any individualism is a threat to a world system. The state is God, the ultimate provider. Individualism is to be obsolete. Russell later on talks about how the human race will perish as a result of science, unless if it submits to the laws of international authority. Now, does that not sound like a threat to you? Because it definitely does to me. If it's not accepted, will a biological weapon be released to rein people in, a nuclear strike on the population? The man had no bounds, and to ask the question does not seem to be unrealistic nor out of bounds. In Russell's last chapter, which he ponders on how or if a scientific society can be stabilized, he firstly talks about the possible causes of instability being physical, biological, and psychological. Basically, in short, according to him, if us peasants, so to say, don't relinquish our natural-born rights to our betters, such as Russell, a new dystopic future will be on the horizon for humanity. So by planning on breaking the family unit, debasing our culture, destroying our faith, indoctrinating the children, giving up our rights and individualism, will create a servile state. It reminds me of a quote Aldous Huxley, who comes from a similar background of Russell, was quoted as saying, "People will learn to love their servitude." So just a personal thing on my part, when you have a government-paid scientist lecturing us all on what studies show, etc., in whatever field, trying to convince us that the solution to solve a particular problem, take for instance global warming as an example, and the solution is to lower our standards of living and pay more taxes, or maybe even perhaps politicians and so-called ethicists convincing us that the life in your belly is a sack of cells and nothing more, degrading your humanity. Perhaps chipping away at our Second Amendment rights, or political correctness infiltrating all areas of life to control our thoughts and speech. Literally take any social issue, and instead of going along with what is promoted and propagated by the majority, I'd suggest start thinking very critically as to where this is coming from and who will ultimately be benefiting by all the new policies, government-created bureaucracies, etc. You may start to realize that none of it will ultimately benefit you, but will so for the few. Educational propaganda with government help could achieve this result in a generation. There are, however, two powerful forces opposed to such a policy. One is religion, the other is nationalism. Well, religion has been uprooted, basically destroyed. Nationalism, or having pride in one's nation, is called racist or Hitlerian in today's age. So it seems like this has been certainly adopted, a negative attitude towards nationalism. So here's a loving solution Russell proposed: that birth control did not help the decrease of population, and people generally did not support reducing the population. Perhaps bacteriological warfare may prove more effective. If a Black Death could be spread throughout the world once in every generation, survivors could procreate freely without making the world too full. The state of affairs might be somewhat unpleasant, but what of that? Really high-minded people are indifferent to happiness, especially other people's. There are three ways of society that shall be stable as regards population. The first is that of birth control, the second that of infanticide, or really destructive wars, and the third that of general misery, except for a powerful minority, of course. A scientific world society cannot be stable unless there is a world government. Well, there's a million ways to skin a cat, and currently in the West, birth rates are significantly dropping. Men's sperm count is continuously dropping. There's so much information out there and more that it's almost overwhelming, and again could take up quite a bit of time going through it all, but look into it for yourselves if you care to. Russell believed that in order to deal with the population problem, that an international authority should deal out the world's food to the various nations. Sorry, but I personally don't trust pacifist Russell with the world's food supply. So I'm going to read to you Russell's conclusive hope on the world. It's his last paragraph, second to last paragraph on page 113. My conclusion is that a scientific society can be stable given certain conditions. The first of these is a single government of the whole world, possessing a monopoly of armed force and therefore able to enforce peace. The second condition is a general diffusion of prosperity, so that there is no occasion for envy of one part of the world by another. The third condition, which supposes the second fulfilled, is a low birth rate everywhere, so that the population of the world becomes stationary or nearly so. The fourth condition is the provision for individual initiative both in work and in play, and the greatest diffusion of power compatible with maintaining the necessary political and economic framework. So I've tried to lay out Russell's beliefs and directly quote from him in this book on how he would like to see a future society. And to me, it doesn't seem like a utopian world at all, but it would be a controlled society, scientifically run by an elite class, the general population held in bondage. This was Russell's dream. and he tries to lay out of how that dream can be accomplished. And so anyhow, that's it for me. This was The Impact of Science on Society by Lord Bertrand Russell. And if you're interested in this book and milling through it yourself, again, I highly recommend it, as it's kind of an inside look into this man's mind. He was definitely in a position of prestige and power and influence in this world, and it's permeated throughout society and those that he taught and ran in similar circles with. So I hope you all enjoyed this book review slash summary slash critique. I hope you like and subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell for future book reviews and also book picks and in-shop activity. Okay, we'll see ya.